Hey everybody, this is Glenn Dakin and the team behind Pure Pursuit Automotive. Today is going to be one of our first informational videos on the subject of lean startup and customer development. If you can find another car dealer out there doing videos like this, I'd be impressed. But what we consider ourselves more of a technology company than really a car company. We're a technology company with a car problem. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So we have everything up on the board and the outlines. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but we'll go ahead and I'll walk through that as we get through it. And real quick, if everybody could turn around and say hi to the camera. This is Brett Ballard. He's our lead sales manager. This is Grant Broughton. He's our digital content creator and office manager, and Lisa Summers, office manager as well as assistant digital content creator. So great team. We're learning a lot together. And what we really want to do today is actually go through the overview of what the lean startup and how that's going to apply to automotive, but more importantly, just to technology in general. And then we're going to go through all that stuff as a general framework, and we actually have a problem we're trying to apply a lean method to, and we'll go ahead and work through that after we do this. So a video really in two parts. We're going to start with this overview. We're going to move through to the next session, which is one of the problems we're trying to tackle. And again, I'll be going between the camera and the team. We're going to try to make this interactive, so you'll see them asking questions. And if anybody on YouTube wants to type in a question to us after this video is posted, feel free, and we'll always get back to you with the questions, and we'll try to continue this conversation. We want to become known as a trusted resource, not only in automotive, but in technology for some of these lean methods, and how do you really apply a new idea to a company that is either brand new or just has an existing product line. You want to launch a new product line. So you'll hear me talk about that as well today. So brief history of why are we at the lean startup when it comes to either a new venture or a new product or a new business. Back in time, Harvard was actually the first college to come up with the MBA program, and they thought at the time in the early 1900s, I think it was, don't quote me, on 1903, they said, hey, we have all this business knowledge out there. We'd like to codify that and put it into a master's level program of all the basics, things like accounting and finance and operations and marketing and strategy. And so they were the first ones that came up with the MBA program. And from there, Silicon Valley startups and startups all over the world have said, hey, if we have really smart people, we give them a good educational background of how to run a business, the things you're looking for, then they'll come up with good ideas. They'll have new ventures they want to launch, and then they're really smart. They have a good degree behind them. We'll just give them a bunch of money, and we'll let them go. And they'll just burn through the money and create a great product and find customers magically, and then they build big businesses. So really, the lean startup kind of flies in the face of that. A great example that Steve Blank, one of the founders and fathers of this lean startup movement, went through, and he wrote a great book called the Startup Owner's Manual. And I highly recommend it for any startup out there. It's basically a Bible of the lean startup and how it goes, and basically checklists and very detailed textbook style of how do you really create a new company from the ground up. So that Steve Blank's, basically the Startup Owner's Manual, gives a good history of this, and they use the example of Webvan. So Webvan in the 90s was a venture capital backed startup. And I can't remember where the founders went to school, but let's just assume that, like any good company, they were Stanford MBAs. They got together in a room. They said, hey, you're smart, I'm smart. Let's come up with some good ideas. We got our backing, we had our MBA program. Let's get together and get some, a business plan written, and let's go ahead and get venture capital backed, and let's roll it out to the world, and they'll all just praise us because we're really smart, and we worked really hard, and we wrote this awesome business plan, and we got funded by venture capitalists, and here we are today, on a 40-foot yacht, 80-foot yacht, depending on how good we do, right? So they kind of just did that, and they said, oh, what people really would want, and we're really smart, we're sitting in a room together, and we just said, hey, here's the idea. We want to just have a grocery delivery service so you don't have to go to the grocery store anymore. Everyone will love that, right? And they just said, yeah, that's great. And they wrote a business plan, and they went to their Stanford friends or their Harvard friends or their MIT friends or wherever, Sloan friends, and they said, great, here's our business plan. Went to venture capitalists and pitched it and said, hey, what we need to start is we're going to need $50 million because we need to build a warehouse. We need to build logistics, supply chain. We need to have marketing and sales. We need to have a website. We need to have web design. We need to have all these things. And then we need to roll it out to the customers, have them just eat it up because it's a great idea. We're all really smart. We're the smartest people on the planet. And isn't that great? And the venture capitalist said, that sounds excellent. And this company, and again, I haven't reviewed the figures in a while, but they ended up wasting something over like $100 million of venture capital money before they realized that their idea wasn't really a good one and that there weren't any real customers out there on a wide stream basis to really adopt this idea. So they didn't really get the early adopters. They didn't roll out a product and actually test it and even ask people if they wanted this thing in the first place. All they did was say, hey, we got a business plan, we put a lot of time into it, we got venture capital backed, and we started a business. And we scaled the business before we had any real customers behind it. So here at Pure Pursuit, we have a couple business lines that we're trying to launch in a lean method, as opposed to just, hey, go out and pitch, I get $5 million of venture capital money, and then we launch this new business and then try to basically shove it down people's throats and say, look how great it is. Or we could just say, hey, what is the cheapest, the fast, and the easiest way that I can launch a new idea or a new venture and I can get people to pay me for it, even if it's very crude, even if it's not quite put together, even if I feel like I'm not ready to launch to the public. There's a quote by Reid Hoffman, and he said, hey, if you're not embarrassed about your first product, you've launched too late. Okay, you should need to be embarrassed about it because you're really trying to find people out there that are interested in what you have to offer in whatever world is going to be. You need to find people out there that are not only interested, but they're willing to pay you. Okay, so the quickest way to do that is really what came around to what we call the lean startup. So again, I've mentioned a couple of people. We have Steve Blank. We have Eric Ries, who was a Stanford MBA. He wrote the book called The Lean Startup. Highly recommended for anybody watching this video, anybody in the team to read The Lean Startup eventually, because what it does, it's a very technology-based book. It's a fast enough read, but what it does is it teaches you some fundamental things you need to know about the Lean Startup, and it also kind of goes in depth enough, and Steve Blank's book takes it even further to a process that he calls customer development. So that's a brief history. There's the Lean Startup in a nutshell. What can I do fast, cheap, and quickly to get my idea out there, whatever the idea is? In Pure Pursuit's stake, we have something we call Pure Concierge. We have some other minor things we want to do. We don't know if they're going to be widely adopted. We don't know if they're extremely innovative. We don't know if there's a customer out there. So instead of going out, writing a big business plan, pitching people for money, and then saying, hey, let's go do this. We got our $10 million, $1 million in the bank, whatever it's going to be. We really want to say, what can we do with the money we have to generate our initial customers, and then go forward from there to say, okay, we have some money rolling in, even though we're embarrassed about it, even though it's lean, even though it's not the best thing we've ever put out. We're not really proud of it, but we know that there's a value there, that people are willing to pay for this service. So that is the Lean Startup. So just remember, if you can remember nothing else from this video for the Lean Startup, what can I do quickly? What can I do cheaply? What can I do that is just efficient to find customers that are willing to say, oh, I have that problem. Thank God you guys have come along. And luckily for us at Pure Pursuit, we've found a couple people that are what we call early adopters, and they have come out and said, geez, I've been trying to, in our case, find a rare car, and I just can't find it in my market. And you guys are saying you can. Tell me more. Now we know, without even spending any marketing money, we put up a website, and we have basically tangential traffic coming in to say, hey, I like this car, but I really want this one with this options. I just can't find anyone. And we go, that's interesting. We have basically a lean idea that we'd like to test out on you. And we kind of do it that way. So what we're really looking for when we're looking at any new idea, whether it's inside your corporation or your company or you're starting something from scratch, is you're really trying to find the product that works, and before that, the idea, and then you're trying to find the market, and you're trying to make those two fit. So I have written up here product, market, fit. And so one of your first stages you're doing is coming up with the idea, and you can write a business plan. Just don't spend too much time on it. But you need to do your due diligence. Is this thing already patented? Does it already exist out there? What are we doing with it? But if you find a new innovative idea that maybe even turns something around from what people are already doing, you have your first idea that develops your first product. Okay, you want to rapidly as possible get to a prototype level of what you're looking at. Okay, so even if it's just a wireframe on a computer, even if it's just a mock-up, even if it's just a concept, in our case, we made an infographic that describes the process that we're willing to undergo for finding people rare cars in the sport luxury world. It's not very much money, and it's a prototype. And then you can push that out to your prospective customers. You're trying to find your market. Then you can start, as opposed to just going on Google and researching and going to the smartest people you know and saying, hey, how big do you think the sport luxury market is? And I'm looking at all these data. That stuff is very important. I'm not here to downplay it. But really in the lean mindset, it's just saying, hey, if I have a problem, I can think of a problem. If I can think of a solution, let's just find another person out there who I can validate that off of. That's a lot more relevant than just, hey, I wrote a business plan that has all these stats in it. Okay? So we're really, in this whole process from the lean startup, trying to achieve an idea that develops into a product that develops and finds a fit with the market. Okay, I'll stop there. Any initial questions from the group?
What are some of the statistical methods that are used? Is it like the basic Dunnett's test and things such as that, or how do you know when you have relevant data versus
statistically
not
insignificant?
Quite enough,
yeah.
If it's not significant yet.
Well, I mean, just from my finance background, a number that you can kind of keep in your mind is if you have a data size of about 40, and this is like n equals 40 type of thing, for your sample size is 40, then you start to get to some of those stats tests that you talked about that will say, okay, this is statistically relevant or not. Now, this issue is kind of like Lisa asked, it's totally dependent upon what you're trying to do. So it's a reasonable man theory, a reasonable person theory. You can just say, okay, if I know this number is pretty good for the finance data, I need to have 40 samples and data points, great. But if I find that 10 out of 10 people are having problems like spooning cereal to their mouth and when they're eating breakfast, there needs to be a new spoon invented because everybody is dribbling, milk all over their beard, and you're not cool unless you have a beard, there's no statistical relevance there. And it's hard because this is all kind of soft. This is not terribly quantitative. It's a lot more qualitative. The way you ask questions is very driven on what you're trying to find, and you're trying to take it down. And the most statistical I could get was taking the notes. Let's say you're interviewing and Grant was taking notes. We just look and say, what are the top 3 pain points we see of this person, and then you even ask them, okay, hey, I'm noticing you have a problem with using the internet, and you have a hold up on sending large amounts of money to dealers that are out of state, and you can't even find the car you want on AutoTrader anyway. What of those 3 are the most, if you could solve them with your magic wand, what would you do to solve that today? And they're like, hey, well, the number one thing is I'm really afraid of sending large money. That's the biggest risk to me. And you're like, okay, got it. Well, do you know anything about escrowing funds? Well, no, I don't. Well, I've solved one of your pain points by just saying you can put the money in escrow. When the dealer ships the car to you, you drop it off, you get it. You go, yeah, this is the car for me. And then the funds are released from escrow to the dealer. And if the car doesn't ever come, or the title never shows, or the car is all jacked up, and the dealer won't answer the phone, well, you never authorized the escrow company. And they're like, oh, cool. What have you just done right there? You've taken their 3 pain points, and you've really taken away one of those barriers to you selling them a car, across state lines, but without even ever meeting you. So again, you're on this path to building a product before you're just asking questions, and you're taking away barriers. Okay, what's that number 2 thing you talked about? Okay, well, I'm just not comfortable using the internet. Okay, what search engines do you use? Oh, I don't know, I use AutoTrader. Well, did you know that there's also cars.com and eBay, and you can even Google this stuff and find who has rare cars if it's in your town. There's something called Google AdWords and advertising. They're like, oh yeah, let me walk you through that. Again, they don't know what you're building. And you've already told them you're not trying to sell anything, and you're not. You're not saying, hey, here's the car, you're going to buy it today. You're just like, you're opening up their mind, you're educating them, you're taking away the second barrier to them buying a car from you, sight unseen, nationwide, right? Okay, not a problem at all. Okay, so we're going to try to get into a feedback cycle. Okay, we're going to try to build something. Even if it's something you're embarrassed about. We're going to try to measure what we learned about that thing that we built, and we're going to try to learn from that. And we're going to repeat this cycle. I'm going to circle this right here because this cycle right here, for anybody watching, is really the heart of the lean startup and any kind of a lean methodology undertaken in any corporation. So again, it doesn't need to be a brand new startup. It can be part of a Fortune 500. It could be a new arm of a Fortune 500, a new product that you're just trying to develop before you waste money on R&D and trying to get it going, to get funding established. Just go out there and ask questions. So really, this whole video is about before you even spend any money, you can spend some of your time and ask some questions and figure out if you can find this idea to product market fit. And the way you do it is build, measure, learn. Okay, so what are you going to build? Well, what we call in the lean startup method is called an MVP. It stands for minimum viable product. So really what you're trying to do is saying, hey, what is the quickest, the cheapest, the easiest thing I can do to build a product that I can get to somebody who I think might be interested in it. So it can be as simple as just an idea that you jot down on paper and you go to your best friend who's really into, in our case, sport luxury cars and say, have you ever had this problem? You can't find your car, you're in a small town, even in a big market, but your car you're trying to find is so rare that you just can't find it at the local dealership. And they go, no, or they go, maybe, or they go, yeah. So now you have your first data point and you can go, okay, so this guy said maybe. So there may be some other people out there as well that have this problem. I'm just going to keep asking that one question, very simple. Go to all my car buddies and say, hey, I had a problem with this, do you as well? So that's a pretty elementary way to do it. So all you're doing at that point is you built a question and you went out there and you measured and said, hey, and now you have some learning that's going on though. So the most important part of this whole cycle is to get to the learning, as opposed to that thing that I talked about at the beginning, Webvan. Those guys sat in a room, they wrote a great 100-page business plan, they had their 5-year projections, financially based off just hockey stick style growth, and they went and pitched the venture capitalist. The venture capitalist said, boy, we also went to Stanford, we're just as smart as you, we also have our MBAs, this is wonderful, you guys are geniuses, let's back you. Okay, so now instead of doing any of that, you really haven't wasted any time. You said, hey, I have a market pain that I think, in our case in Pure Pursuit Automotive, hey, I have a market pain that I think people can't get the exact type of cars they want when they're really looking for a kind of a narrower car, not a Honda Accord or F-150. We stock things like a BMW M3. Hey man, I want this thing. There's maybe 100 nationwide. There maybe are 10,000 F-150s nationwide. So I want to know the scope because I want this thing to be yellow with a blue interior. Okay, that might be pretty tough to find. So I go up to my friends without even having to worry about any business plan writing, without any venture capital raising, without any spending in R&D, without even designing a website. I just start asking people I know. And then I start asking them, hey, do you know of anybody, and this is the important part, guys, do you know of anybody that is also like you, who's really into sport luxury cars? Do you mind if I talk to them? And that comes to this customer development that we'll get to in a second here. But really the customer development is about going down what I call the rabbit hole. And I did this for another company that I started, and basically we were talking to people all over the world and saying, hey, at the end of the conversation of a very guided methodology on how you can do this, you say, do you know of anybody else that's going through this market pain? You're trying to get into grad school, trying to invent a new invention and patent something, trying to find a sport luxury car, whatever example you can come up with. The most important thing you can do is to get out of your circles and ask people randomly. Now, very pointed questions. Hey, what do you think? What's your biggest point? And the first thing you're trying to do is really understand a market pain. And it comes back to finding that idea that develops into a product, that market fit. Okay, so you're trying to find the market pain, trying to define that, understand that before you just build out a product. So don't do it in the reverse cycle. Don't build a product, shove it down people's throats and saying, I can't believe nobody's buying this. I'm trying to shove it down your throat. I got millions of dollars of marketing behind me to shove it down your throat, and people are like, I don't want it. Wouldn't that be nice to know before you began this whole process? So MVP, we build a minimum viable product. And again, I mentioned Pure Pursuit's minimum viable product for our nationwide brokering is just a simple infographic that describes the process, costs like a couple $100, but it looks good enough that we could present it to customers. Because before we were doing that, the idea that I came up with was, hey, we got to just email them and talk to them about it, and we get on the phone and call them, and it's just easy enough to have a little product that we're able to ship to people, and then we ask them constantly, hey, what do you think about this? You're one of the first people who are doing this. Hey, what do you think about this? Now, again, what we should have done prior to that, and it's a mistake I made, was just getting on the phone for as much as possible and saying, hey, let me understand your problem. You claim to be an enthusiast in automotive. You claim to want these sport luxury vehicles. Let me understand your problem before I even tell you about the solution I'm trying to bring to you, okay? I'm just gonna understand their problem. So one of the first things in customer development is really understanding the market through a market pain. What is inconvenient about this? What would you improve if you had a magic wand? These are all questions that are very specific to this process. And so, if you wave the magic wand and a car appeared in your door, without even having to go to a dealership, if that's what somebody tells us, then we just know right off the bat that we have a pretty dynamite idea as long as we can identify the right market. We didn't build that process and shove it down anybody's throat. They told us, hey, this would be great for me. So I'd heard that. And I didn't do a formal customer development process, but I'd heard that a couple different times from enthusiasts, and I knew that there were people out there. So we built our minimum viable product, and then we shipped it out. And even people looking at cars we have in inventory, a very traditional model, they're coming to us and saying, hey, I read about this brokering. Tell me more. Because I can't, the one you have is great in stock, but what I really like is these two different options. I want a different color. And we go, okay, we'll ship you our minimum viable product. We don't use these terms, these are lean terms, but on their side, they think it's a fully developed product, right? And that's the most important part. This needs to be good enough that people will understand that it might be new, but they're not so leery of it that they won't use it, okay? So in the case of our infographic that we send people, it looks to be a fully developed process that we've been doing for years. So the way that we kind of get around that is we say, hey, this is a brand new process, bleeding edge technology, which these are all true things that go underneath it. And this is the way that we're going to sell cars in the future. And we want to shape the industry this way. We're the first ones doing it. And you try to build people to get excited about that. And still, sure, it's a minimum viable product, but all intents and purposes for them, they look at it and they go, hey, this looks like a pretty cool idea. If you found the right market and identified the right market pain, then you can just go to them and say, here's what we got for you. Let's make it happen. So we got our initial customers that are coming in for this now. And if we do a good job, we have built something. We've measured it from them. We've got even initial sales. From a cheap infograph, we have the ability to make revenue coming from brokering. That's the whole idea behind that. Before we went out and said, hey, venture capitalists, we got a great idea. We're going to broker in this way, unlike anybody else. We need $10 million to start it so we can advertise it on the Super Bowl and so forth. I mean, we've built something. We've got measure from real people, real customers that are really interested in what we have to offer. And we're doing our learning phase right now on our first cycle of build, measure, learn. Any questions?
Well, my question is that during the customer development phase, when you're doing the interviews and gathering the feedback or
Yeah.
building or measuring, I'm not sure quite what
Closer.
terminology you want to use for
Yeah.
that one. But how many people do you ask? I mean, is there a good time when you're like, okay, do I ask 10,000 people or do I ask 10 people?
Basically, the way that I'm no advocate, I'm no guru that is, I'm an advocate of this process. I didn't write the book on it, but the way they say is you'll know. And it's so funny. It sounds kind of cheesy to say, but you actually just end up, you're like, okay, I've heard people have trouble with financing in grad school internationally. 8 out of 10 times I've interviewed them. Do you think it's a problem? Yeah. I mean, at that point, any reasonable person would be like, okay, these other two are wealthy individuals, and the real people, 8 out of 10, 80-20 principle, kind of thing. Probably a problem. Let's now we know our problem. Let's develop a whole new set of questions, and then let's ask even just finance-based questions. Hey, exactly where do you shop when you're looking for finance? Hey, exactly what rates are you trying to get? What does the Indian government offer? How do you think that system could be improved? What do you think about American financing? Is that even open to you? And again, I wanted to finance Indians to go to grad school at a cheap rate, but and see if I could work the visas and all that. But they didn't need to know that. They needed to just have asked questions that are even more drilled down to say, okay, this is what I'm trying to understand here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so again, I mean, you can interview 2 people. Probably need to do some more, so you want to get to some statistical relevancy of how many people you're going to ask. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's all dependent upon, like I mentioned, the pain point, the idea, the product itself. It's dependent on the market. Depends on how well these two are intermingled in the fit. I mean, it's an interesting process, but you'll know it's kind of interesting. You see people that have actually done this, and we knew too. We interviewed 25 people, and man, we're like, oh, every one of them says it's a pain to get into grad school. They're like, hey, I'm the only one doing it, and then I didn't know like even where to turn to. Luckily, I had my friend that went through it, so I just went to him, and he gave me a stack of books. That's what I did personally before I went to business school. I was like, I don't know anything about business, like. Oh, Olivia, you went, and she gave me a book and stack of books, and I said, great, now I got this, and I started reading, and I went and took the test because I knew I had to take some test, and then I kind of was like, I need to get into school, and I got into school, and I went, and I showed up to business school, and I don't know anything about business. I know how to take a test to get into business school, and then I had to kind of teach myself again. So, what I define that process, it's like a lonely process. Same thing if you're an enthusiast and you're in a sea of cars, there's 1,000 Audis around, and you're like, there's not even a single RS4 here for me. It's kind of lonely because then the salesman had already even seen one. You've read about it online. If they're enthusiasts, they may have read about it, and that's it. You're like, okay, well, I got myself. So now how am I going to get this thing to my driveway? I live in, wherever, somewhere in Alabama, tiny town. I mean, it just doesn't really matter. It's like, how am I going to get this thing to my? So, you'll know. That's kind of the point on that. So to get back to build, measure, and learn, how do you do this? What's the first thing you do? Do you sit in the room cloistered and you just talk about how smart you are and how great your idea is and how the funding's going to flow and we're going to retire to some Caribbean island? Or do you actually, what we call, get out of the building and talk to real people that have maybe a possible real problem? And you got to talk to people, okay? So we're shifting gears from sort of the way this works in theory to, hey, how do we execute on this? How do we do this? How do we move from, hey, we got this thing, I've read the book, got it, I read Lean Startup. Now what do I do about it? So the most important thing that everybody out there needs to remember is, hey, you got to get out of the building, okay? So that's a key phrase, and what that means is you have a new idea for your organization. It could be any organization. You don't just sit around and waste time in the traditional sense of thinking about it, writing business plans, doing the market research. All that stuff is very important, don't get me wrong. That could be done alongside of gathering real data. So that's the new method. Hey, alongside of doing my business plan and due diligence, I'm going to get out there and talk to people. I'm going to fish where the fish are, right? If I'm trying to sell sports gear, I'm going to go to the in here in Kansas City Chiefs Arrowhead Stadium. I'm going to talk to people, in whatever method I can. Giving away free booze tends to help getting people to open up. So that's pretty nice. Hey, I'm pouring some wine here, whatever. Hey, let me talk to you. Hey, do you have any? What do you do about this process? What do you find is a problem with this? Hey, I'm not trying to sell anything. It's an important part as we move to these customer development interviews, and we're talking about getting out of the building. You get out of the building. Talk to people. So one of the most important things is you get up there and you say, hey, I got some questions for you. You seem to be really into Chiefs gear here at Arrowhead. I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just trying to learn about something so I can develop a new product. And it opens people up. Then you give them some free booze. Everybody wins, right? So customer development is basically getting out of the building to talk to real customers, to develop the idea in front of your potential, real, early adopter customers, okay? And so that's what you're really doing. You're conducting this via interviews. These don't need to be very long. The ones we did with my previous education company, they're maybe 15 minutes. So we'd say, hey, via email, can I borrow 15 minutes of your time to talk to you about something that that we're trying to develop at my company. You don't let them know what it is. You just say, I want to talk to you about, I want to talk to you about you. Don't you want to talk about yourself? Yeah, most people do. And we had a great reception, talking to people all over the world in Skype, and borrowing 15 minutes at a time, we'd set it up. So this stuff, it's a very intensive process for time, but it's not a very intensive process for money. You're not really spending any money, which is the best part. Remember, in any startup, I kind of think about it, I was a pilot in the Navy, so I like to think about it as the plane's rolling down the runway, and you gotta have enough money that's your runway before the plane takes off, and you get a real product market fit, and people are paying you to cover your overhead and cover your people and be able to grow. So you gotta get that plane enough runway, so you don't want to spend any money, because you can run out of money, the idea is dead until you get more money, and then good luck convincing people the second time. So customer development really comes from this get out of the building idea, right? So we get out of the building, we have our scripts together that we talk about, hey, we're talking about you. We're talking about what you've done in the past. We're talking about the way you think it could be improved. I don't let on that I want to broker you cars nationwide and you're a real enthusiast. I just say, hey, how is it going to the dealership? How do you like that when you're looking for, you say you're an enthusiast, you're looking for an Audi RS5. How's that experience? You go to the local Audi dealership and the guy says, are you freaking kidding me? An RS5, like I get put on a waiting list. They say they'll call me, and I don't hear from them for months and months. And I'm ready to buy. I know that I want the car, can't find it. Oh, okay, well now I've just learned something, right? I've learned your market pain of when you go to the dealership for this one particular car, what your experience is. And I take notes on that. And over time, I do enough interviews that I kind of figure it out. I go, okay, so what I've figured out here is that people, when they're enthusiasts, they want a very particular type of car. New, sure, they order it from the factory. 1 year old, 6 months old, 10 years old, it's pretty tough. It's a pretty tough experience. You go to the one dealership in town that might have the car. They, of course, don't have it. If they have one in stock, it's the wrong color, so on and so forth. So in our company, in Pure Pursuit Automotive, we just kind of did that customer development by getting out of the building, asking real enthusiasts that I knew, and then I tried to talk to other people, going down that rabbit hole as I spoke. I said, hey, what are your pains? What do you think's good about the dealership? What do you think's bad about the dealership? What do you do about online purchasing? Are you comfortable buying cars online? So again, it's not to say that you can't guide the conversation. And a really good interview, by the end of it, they've probably figured out from their answers that you've created some solution. And that's really good, because I had people in my previous company say, hey, what are you guys trying to do? You trying to do this? And we're like, yeah. They're like, hey, I could see that being useful. Keep in touch with me. You've earned your first customer without even spending anything. Okay, so that's the cool thing. Customer development is a very powerful way to get in front of people, ask the questions, get out of the building. Don't just look at each other in your super smart group and all that. And hey, we learn the real things. And along the way, if you're really doing it right, you actually gain your first customers. And even if you're really good and you've developed a market pain that a lot of people have, you've had people, hey man, here's $100, here's my pre-order. As soon as you make this product, it's $1,000, consider this a down payment. You have money coming in without even building anything. So again, you're building the questions first, then you're measuring, and finally you're learning. And this is a cycle, and I should draw little arrows here. It's gonna be tough to see on camera, but this cycle really is just continuous, right? So any good technology organization, in us, we consider ourselves an automotive technology startup. Any good organization that is doing this cycle continuously will continuously iterate and improve and kind of get along that path to finding other market pains and therefore other streams of revenue to help people out, provide them value, charge fairly for it, and stay in business and grow that business. Anything from the group?
How do you know that you're asking a good question? Because if you come up with a bank of questions that are all kind of loaded toward your end result, you might get a bunch of people that have that pain point that you think that you've solved backwards through your questions. What's a good way?
You've driven them to your own conclusion.
How do you get around making questions like that?
Okay.
What's a good way to do that?
No, right here, art of asking questions. So it really is an art. Certain questions are going to be terrible. They're going to be leading people directly to where they're like, oh, of course, you want to broker me. You're trying to sell me cars. I know what you're trying to do. I mean, I never got that. The way you actually have to ask it, and let's use the car example because it's the one that we at Pure Pursuit are facing when we're trying to undergo this lean startup method of a new business line. Okay, the way we'd actually ask that is the same things I asked you. Hey, how comfortable do you find it to be a pain or not a pain to do large purchases on Amazon? That's a related question, right? Would you ever buy a $15,000 TV from Amazon? Yes, no. I mean, and you're trying to also not have them, ask yes or no questions. You'd say, describe to me that, if you ever would, And why wouldn't you, if that's the case, buy a large TV on Amazon? Because now we're talking about large transactions online, and you're talking about it in a frame of Amazon, so they have no idea where you're going with any of this stuff. You can do that. So again, the art of asking questions, and you really don't want to have yes or no. That's the other thing, for the audience. You don't want to have the yes or no questions that are just a little too easy to back out of. Would you pay $15.99 for this? Yes. No. Yeah. Hey, what do you think's an appropriate price? And then they're like, oh, I don't know. I'd probably pay $25. Oh, why is that? So if you try to drive them to, in their own words, okay, and that's even the back end of it, because again, that's sort of like, here's the product, how much you're willing to pay, and why. No, you don't even want to get it to that point. You want to have, okay, you're paying $49 for this service on Amazon right now. Do you think that's fair? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Again, no yes or no's. And you're not even talking at all about your product, right? Whatever you want to sell them. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So entrepreneurship, I think a lot of people are, kind of well versed in. Hey, I'm just some dude. I don't want to work for a living. I'd rather work 80 hours a week to avoid a 40-hour-a-week job. That's the whole joke about entrepreneurs, right? And so, hey, this whole thing is really kind of set in the Lean Startup. If you ever read that book, it really just kind of goes through, hey man, if you're starting a tech startup and you're driving traffic to your website and you're trying to break out the data and you're trying to figure out how many people are buying your product or calling you, whatever, it's very centered on starting a new concept in technology. But if smart readers will pick up this, you can really drive this concept to almost anything, anything new in life. If you're going to add on to your house, before you do all that, why don't you ask your family how they're feeling about, the constrained space that you think is constrained. Maybe they don't even give a crap, right? So, it really applies to anything. So entrepreneurship, great. It applies to a new venture, but it also applies to what's called intrapreneurship. If you work at a Fortune 500 and you're in charge of a strategic business unit and they task you with inventing a new product, whatever the case can be, you can certainly apply these lessons. This product market fit certainly applies to a giant multinational global corporation, and you're just sitting down and trying to do something new. Even inventing a new process that you feel is a pain point. Before you go out and invent a new HR process, you might want to talk to people and say, hey, how do you like this current process? What are your problems with it, if there's anything? If nothing at all, nothing at all, nothing at all, nothing at all, you go down the path and you're like, maybe I don't need to invent a new process. Let's not waste company time, company money. So that should cover, the intrapreneurship. It's just a methodology to almost, intra per house ship if you're trying to, do that home edition like I mentioned as an example. So the cool thing about all this, it's just a mindset, and it's just to say, hey, how do you effectively come up with something new, a new idea? How do you effectively implement it before you waste your own time, somebody else's time, your own money, somebody else's money, your own resources, somebody else's resources? Okay, so customer development, interviews. The way you interview is very, very important. I've mentioned this a couple times. Let's just hash this out real quick. Okay, so interviews themselves, how you actually structure the interview is very important. There's a lot of good books out there that do that. Steve Blank's the Startup Owner's Manual is very important. He has a very nice section on interviewing that talks about, hey, you walk up, you say, hey, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I just kind of borrow a couple minutes of your time. Ideally, try to do it in person. Even try to have somebody, he's asking the questions, and Grant, you're taking notes. That way he can just kind of feel free to talk, and you're taking notes on what he's asked. You should have those questions basically on a template, but more importantly, you're taking notes of those responses. Okay, so you're taking notes, you're doing it in person as much as possible. We try to do it in Skype, face-to-face when you're doing worldwide stuff, so you can kind of see the way they react to stuff, because you'll ask certain questions, and you'll be expecting a response. You expect them to say, oh yeah, that's a great, I love this experience. I love going to the dealership in our case and getting pushed around and, hey, you don't really want an RS4, what you want is an A4. And no, bro, I don't want an A4. Oh no, sometimes you'll hear that, and you'll hear people say things that you wouldn't expect in your wildest dreams. You'd say, this, a good example of the guy for the A4 and the Audi RS4. Yeah, the guy convinced me at the dealership that I couldn't afford it, and I really don't like to drive that fast, and I don't want 600 horsepower. So he pushed me in an A4, and I've been never happier ever since. And you're just like, your mind is blown, okay? So it's really important. That's why you got to get out of the building, because you're going to learn things you never even would have conceived. You're looking at, from your own perspective, your own filter, and saying, I would take an Audi A4 and drive it off a cliff before I'd ever buy one. And this guy's like, hey, I ended up loving it, and I don't even want all that stuff. Maybe my girlfriend likes to drive it, and I don't. Whatever the story's going to be, you might learn things that are just mind-blowing, okay? So it's very important to do these interviews, ask the questions correctly, and have somebody taking notes, and try to do it face-to-face whenever possible. And do as many as it takes until you really see a trend, and that's the whole thing. You got to there's no magic number. In our case, for our concierge brokering line, there was no magic number. of people that I said, okay, I'm going to do 10 interviews and then I'm going to learn one thing or another. You know, you're always learning, but you're never like, okay, I've learned everything, I'm going to shut it down and build. It could take 100 interviews. It could take 5 interviews. It just depends on the type of pain you've exposed, to the type of product that you're thinking about, and the way you ask the questions. And then what we did is we took all of our customer interviews and we put them in a spreadsheet, and then we said, okay, what are the top 3 pains we've identified in my previous company, as an education and technology company? We said, okay, the number 1 pain is applying to grad school. The number 2 pain is finance. The number 3 pain is finding internships and jobs on the backside. So let's attack the number 1 pain first. Let's get people right now started to get to international acclaimed business schools. And we started doing that in India and started to get some customers. So the cool thing is we built a website. We found a product that we identified as a market pain without spending any money. And we built the website up around the idea of mentoring people in India to get into US grad schools, specifically business schools. And we got our first customers. So it's kind of like, if you have a market pain you identified, if you have a solution that you have in mind that you can build around what people have told you from real data that you've learned as opposed to sitting around a room, then you can build something and you can measure that, and revenue comes along with measuring if you're doing it right almost right away. And you can learn and then reiterate, improve the website with that money. Get out and actually get a marketing campaign going. Get out and actually, it's time for pitching. Hey, this is a great idea. We need $10,000. We need $100,000. We need $10 million. You can start pitching for investor-backed money if you found that your idea, sort of satisfies product market fit, and you're in this loop continuously. So real data, the importance of real data. I mean, I've said it a couple times in this video, the importance of real data versus just, hey, I think this would be a great idea. I think it'd be great to broker cars nationwide to enthusiasts when they can't otherwise find what they want. So now we have real data behind it. We have customers that have approached us. We have interviews that we've conducted with people to say, hey, what are your pains when you're trying to find this car? Are you just like me? Are you not like me? And then we've applied that to build something, and we're starting to turn revenue from that. Very, very important to be able to do that. And very quickly. So again, quick, cheap, and as quickly and as inexpensively as you can. I just said that, quick and cheap, but then as easy as you can. Make it, again, if you have to be embarrassed about it, by all means be embarrassed about it, but at least somebody, and Steve Blank has this great phrase, he says, if they've cobbled together a solution, if you're trying to invent a weed whacker that also has an attachment to chop off a limb, and you see a guy out there like tinkering in his garage and he's made that and that's your idea, if they've cobbled that solution together on their own, and then you say, I'm going to produce this in a factory so it's not so unsafe, so you don't have your blade flying and decapitating your little daughter there. I can do this for you. And the guy's like, here's your first $100. That's very important. So again, if you see anybody cobbling together a solution, and I did that when I wanted to broker cars on a private side and get cars, bottom side unseen all over the country. I was doing that, and I knew there's other people like that. So that's why I kind of came up with the process of what we call Pure Concierge, and we're starting to do that. So the issue is, okay, how many more people are out there, and how much more revenue can we drive to expand and say, okay, should we really be marketing this at a level of $1,000 a month or $100,000 a month? We just don't know how big the market is. It's hard to tell. Sometimes you have a hard to define market. So instead of just getting $100,000 and blowing through it and be like, oh man, we thought we were going to sell 50 and we sold 1, then we're just going to continue to drive revenue from operations and expand it that way. So again, lean startup is all about identifying that stuff and getting people to really pay you, and if you don't have a good idea, you got to call what Eric Ries, you got to do what Eric Ries says in the lean startup. You have to pivot or persevere. Hey, if it's not a good idea and you're finding that out before you spend any money or build anything, you got to pivot the idea to something different. It could be a pivot from brokering luxury cars to creating weed whacker attachment. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to even be related, but this whole cycle right here will help you determine when it's time to pivot. When nobody is saying, boy, this is a great idea. When nobody is willing to pay you. Because you can ask all day, hey, how much are you willing to pay? And people are like, oh, I'll be willing to pay $1 million, and they walk away. Now, if you have somebody actually give you money, that's a lot more powerful than, oh, I'd be willing to pay this, because everybody's gonna lie to you to your face. You're interviewing them. Oh yeah, how much are you willing to pay? Oh, at least $25 for this thing that that you're trying to sell for $1, because they want to be nice. They don't want to tell you in your face your idea sucks. Get out of my face. You're wasting my time. They probably won't. Now, if you start to hear that, that's a good sign too, that you need to pivot, or you persevere on the path and keep going along with that. So the art of asking questions. So we'll get to this, and then I think we're running a little long on this video, so we'll kind of wrap it up. So the art of asking questions, again, you don't tell them about what you're trying to build. You try to ask about their pain points. You try to say, hey, what in this event will be improved? In your words, hey, what is the hardest part about doing this event, going to a Chiefs game or buying a car, or whatever the subject's going to be, and you just kind of ask them those questions. Okay, so that'll wrap up. That's a good overview. for just the lean startup, the history, moving all the way through to customer development. How do you ask questions and getting out of the building? And we're going to move on the second half of this video really quickly to sort of a brainstorming question session between our staff of the predicament that we face in trying to figure something out. We're trying to build something that's never been in existence where we store our cars. So if you want, you can go ahead and stay tuned in. Check out the next video on our YouTube channel, Pure Pursuit Automotive. Go ahead and find that. It'll be part 2 of this series. And again, I'm Glenn Dakin, Pure Pursuit Automotive. Thanks for watching.